The first rule I learned was not the most important one, but it was the one that stuck in my head as the C-130's engines whined us toward oblivion. Don't look at the water in the dark. That's what the man in the cramped, windowless office in Honolulu had told me, his face lit by the green glow of a radar screen that showed nothing. You'll be on the graveyard shift, he'd said. 10 at night to 6 in the morning. Your primary duty is to not look at the water in the dark. Secondary duties include atmospheric data logging, maintenance of the generator, and radio relay. The pay is deposited weekly. Do you have any questions? I had 100, but the number in the contract, the one that would erase the medical debt my father left behind in 6 months of work, shut most of them down. The only one that mattered was why. He'd handed me a thick, military-style binder. It's in the operational manual, all of it. Memorize the routes, the schedules, the frequencies. Your predecessor annotated it. His notes are gospel. That was 3 days ago. Now, the shuttering aircraft deposited me and my duffel bag onto a metal grate runway on a scrap of rock and concrete in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth. The place was called Outpost Kappa 7. It was a weather and communications relay station, according to the paperwork. A glorified shed with a giant satellite dish and a tower of antennae, clinging to a flat, artificial island no more than 200 yards across. The airstrip took up half of it. The living quarters, operation shack, and generator hut took up the rest. There was no beach, just sheer concrete walls descending into black water that stretched to every horizon. A man in a faded blue coverall met me on the tarmac. He was maybe 60, with a face like sun-bleached driftwood and eyes that didn't quite settle on me. Miller, he said by way of introduction. He was the day shift operator, my replacement in the grand scheme, but more immediately, my trainer for the next 72 hours. He didn't offer a handshake. Your gear's in the locker. Let's get you inside. Sunsets in 40 minutes. The operations shack was a single room, 20 by 30 feet, lined with analog dials, a radio console, 2 radar scopes, 1 blank, and a bank of reel-to-reel data loggers that ticked and hummed. A large reinforced window, divided into 4 panes, looked out toward the western edge of the platform. Beyond it, nothing but deepening blue sky and an endless, undulating plain of charcoal gray. Miller showed me the generator hut, a roaring diesel beast that needed checking every 2 hours. He showed me the bunk room, a closet with 2 cots, and the galley, which was a hot plate and a pantry, stocked with canned goods and instant coffee. He showed me the head, a single toilet and sink tucked behind a flimsy door. You use it, you lock it behind you, every time, even if you're the only soul on the rock. Finally, as the last sliver of sun bled out on the western horizon, he sat me down at the main console and opened the binder. It wasn't just a manual. The first 20 pages were standard fare, frequency lists, generator maintenance schedules, emergency contact codes. Then came the annotated section, neat, handwritten notes in several different inks, some faded, some fresh. At the top of the page, in block letters, it said, Kappa 7 standing orders for night watch, graveyard shift, 2200, 0600. Read it, Miller said, his voice flat. Out loud. I need to hear you say you understand each one. I cleared my throat. The air in the shack suddenly felt colder. 1. All exterior lights are to be activated at 2150. The perimeter floodlights, the runway markers, the beacon on the comms tower. Check each one visually from the window. If any fail to illuminate, do not go outside to repair them. Notify day shift via log entry only. 2. At 2200 exactly, seal the operations shack door. The seal is a 1-inch strip of black electrical tape placed vertically over the seam between the door and the frame at eye level. If the tape is broken in the morning, note it in the log. 3. Primary radio contact with Honolulu Command is at 22:15 and at 0400 on Channel 6. Do not use Channel 3 after 2300 under any circumstances. If you hear traffic on Channel 3, do not respond. Note the time and content in the log. 4. The data logger for Array Beta will produce a paper tape. At 2300 and at 0300, you must measure the exact length of tape produced in the preceding 4-hour window. The acceptable range is between 7 and 9 feet. If it is outside this range, do not adjust the machine. Note the measurement in the log. If it is below 5 feet or above 11 feet, initiate Protocol Sigma. 5. A perimeter patrol must be conducted every 2 hours on the hour, beginning at midnight. The patrol is a visual scan from the western window only. Do not go outside. Do not use the exterior door after 2200 unless following an emergency protocol. The scan should last no less than 2 minutes and no more than 4. You are looking for movement on the platform or on the water. If you see movement, do not use the radio. Note the direction and approximate distance in the log. If the movement approaches within 50 yards of the western edge, initiate Protocol Row. 6. The generator fuel level must be checked at 2330 and at 0430. The gauge is in the operation shack. The auxiliary gauge is on the generator itself. The readings must match. If they do not go to the generator hut to investigate. Note the discrepancy in the log. 7. There is a secondary radar screen, designated Screen B. It will remain powered but blank between 2200 and 0500. This is normal. If it activates and shows a return, do not look at it for more than 3 seconds. Turn off the power to the entire unit immediately. Do not note this in the log. 8. At exactly 0100, you will hear 3 knocks on the operation shack door. Do not answer. Do not approach the door. Wait for 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, you will hear a single knock. At that point, you may resume normal duties. 9. The faucet in the head may produce salt water intermittently. This is a known plumbing issue. If the water runs clear for more than 30 seconds continuously between midnight and 0400, turn it off at the wall valve and do not use the sink for the remainder of the shift. 10. Under no circumstances are you to look at the ocean through any window, viewer, or monitor during the hours of darkness. Atmospheric data is to be read from the instruments only. Your visual focus is to remain on the platform, the equipment, and the interior of the shack. If you inadvertently see the water, immediately close your eyes for a count of 10 and focus on the sound of the generator. 11. A supply of red emergency flares is located under the main console. There are 12. Inventory them at the start and end of each shift. Do not use them. 12. If you hear a voice calling your name from outside, from the radio, or from within the compound, you are to put on the supplied noise-canceling headphones, charged and in the locker, and play the provided white noise cassette tape until the sensation of being called has passed. Do not answer. Do not acknowledge. 13. The shift ends at 0600 At 05:45, you may turn off the exterior floodlights. The runway markers and tower beacon remain on. At 0600, you may break the tape seal and open the door to day shift. Do not open the door for any reason before 0600. 14. You are to log everything that occurs, no matter how minor. The log is your testimony. It is the only thing that matters. My voice was dry by the end. I looked up at Miller. He was staring at the blank radar B screen. "Do you understand?" he asked, not looking at me. "I understand the instructions," I said carefully. "I don't understand the reasons." "Reasons don't matter here," he said, finally turning his gaunt face toward me. "Compliance matters. This place listens. It learns patterns. The rules are the patterns it expects. You break the pattern, it notices you. You don't want to be noticed." He stood up, joints popping. "My shift ended an hour ago. I'm going to sleep. You have the watch. Remember the first rule. Don't look at the water." He left me alone in the buzzing, ticking shack. The tape over the door seam was already in place, black and stark. I checked my watch, 21:58. I walked to the western window. My heart was a dull hammer in my chest. I could see the floodlights casting, pools of sickly yellow on the stained concrete. The runway markers were tiny green dots. The beacon on the tower flashed a steady, silent rhythm. All lights were on. I forced my gaze to stop at the edge of the light. Beyond was a wall of pure black. The sound of the waves was a constant, low shush, like a giant breathing. I realized I was holding my breath. I made myself look away, down at the instruments. The barometer was steady. The wind speed was 18 knots from the northeast. At 2200 exactly, I went to the door. I touched the tape. It was secure. I felt a ridiculous urge to peel it back, to prove I could. I didn't. The first radio check at 22:15 was a bland, automated affair. A female voice in Honolulu recited a string of alphanumeric codes. I read back the confirmation code from my sheet. Kappa 7, copy all, out. No warmth, no curiosity, just procedure. The night settled in. The shack felt like a lifeboat adrift in an inkwell. I followed the rules. At 2300, I measured the beta array tape. The paper was warm, covered in jagged, meaningless lines. I carefully stretched it out along the metal. Ruler bolted to the console. 8 feet, 2 inches. Well within tolerance. I logged it. At 2330, I checked the generator fuel gauge. It read half. I looked at the schematic. The auxiliary gauge was a small circle labeled G2. It also read half. I logged it. Fuel at 50%. Gauges match. Midnight. Time for the first perimeter patrol. I stood at the western window, my hands gripping the cold steel of the sill. I set my watch timer for 2 minutes. I scanned the lit areas of the platform, the fuel drum storage, the antenna array foundations, the edge of the airstrip. Nothing moved but the shadows of the antenna wires swaying in the wind. My eyes itched to drift outward, to peer into the vast dark. I kept them locked on the concrete. At 2 minutes, I started to look away, then stopped. A movement, not on the platform, on the water. Just at the absolute limit of the floodlight's reach, maybe 70 yards out, a patch of deeper black seemed to shift against the general swell. It was formless. It could have been a trick of the light, a gathering of foam, but it moved against the wind-driven current, sliding laterally for a few seconds before sinking back into the uniformity of the dark. My breath caught. Rule 5. If you see movement, note the direction and approximate distance in the log. I fumbled for the logbook. My pen scratched loud in the quiet. 0021. Movement observed on water. Approx. 70 YDs due west of platform. No approach. Logged. I didn't initiate Protocol Row. It hadn't come within 50 yards. The next 2 hours were a torture of focus. Every hum of the machinery sounded like a voice. Every creak of the shack's metal frame was a footstep. I counted the flares under the console twice. 12. At exactly 0100, as promised, 3 knocks echoed through the metal door. Thump, thump, thump. Solid, firm, unhurried. Not the wind, not a loose cable. 3 distinct impacts. My blood turned to ice. I sat frozen at the console. Rule 8. Do not answer. Do not approach the door. I didn't. I stared at the tape seal, half expecting it to peel away by itself. 3 minutes. I watched the second hand on the wall clock sweep its agonizing circle. After 180 seconds, a single, final knock resonated through the room. Thump. Then silence. The normal sounds of the generator and the sea rushed back into the void. I let out a shuddering breath and logged the event. 0100, 3 knocks, then single knock after 3-minute interval. Procedure followed. The rest of the shift was a blur of exhausted compliance. The beta tape at 0300 measured 7 feet, 11 inches. The fuel gauges matched. I played the white noise tape in the headphones for 10 minutes after I swore. I heard a faint, sing-song call of hey on the edge of the wind. It was probably just the wind. At 0545, I turned off the floodlights. The world outside shrank to the green runway markers and the flashing beacon. At 0600 precisely, I broke the tape seal, the adhesive snapping with a final sound, and opened the door. Miller was there, holding 2 mugs of coffee. The sky was a pale, watery gray. He looked at my face, at the broken tape in my hand. He handed me a mug. "How was your first night?" "I followed the rules," I said, my voice rough. He gave a short, grim nod. "Good, that's the job." He stepped inside, his eyes immediately going to the logbook, open on the console. He read my entries, his lips moving silently. He paused at the movement log. 70 yards. It was testing the light boundary. It'll do that. He said nothing about the knocks. He closed the book. "Get 4 hours of sleep. I'll wake you at 1100 for daytime orientation and drills." I stumbled to the bunk room. Miller's cot was neatly made. Mine was a tangle of sheets. I lay down, the images of the shifting dark and the sound of the knocks playing behind my eyelids. I slept fitfully, dreaming of tape that stretched across an endless sea. Daytime on Kappa 7 was a different world. Harsh, sun-bleached, and boring. Miller showed me how to perform actual maintenance, how to change the data logger tapes, how to troubleshoot the radio. We did drills. Protocol Sigma for out-of-tolerance beta readings involved disconnecting the array feed and locking a heavy steel cover over its control panel. Protocol Row for something approaching within 50 yards was more elaborate. Kill all non-essential power in the shack, draw the blackout curtains over the western window, and sit in silence with the headphones on for 30 minutes. "Why 30 minutes?" I asked during a drill. "That's how long it usually takes to lose interest," Miller said, his tone suggesting that was a complete and satisfactory answer. On the second night, the pattern held. I activated the lights. I sealed the door. I did the radio check. At 2300, the beta tape was 8 feet even. At midnight, my perimeter scan showed nothing. The knocks came at 0100, 3, then a pause, then 1. I was ready for them this time. My pulse still spiked, but I didn't move from my chair. I logged it. The temptation came at 0217. I was doing a routine check of the instrument voltages when the radio, set to the mandatory silent channel 3, crackled to life. Not with static, with a voice. It was Miller's voice, but wrong, slurred, thick, as if talking through water. "Hey, kid, the generator, it's sputtering. You need to check the fuel line, now." I froze, my hand hovering over the main power switch for the radio. Rule 3. If you hear traffic on channel 3, do not respond. But this wasn't random traffic. This was my trainer, my only human contact, telling me there was a real mechanical problem. A problem that, if left unchecked, could leave me in the dark. I knew the gauges had matched at 23:30, but that was over 2 hours ago. A fuel line could clog. The diesel could gel. The voice came again, more urgent. "Kid, it's Miller. The Jenny's gonna die. You'll be blind out here. Come out and check it." It sounded so real. The faint New England accent he had. The way he said, Jenny. But the rules were clear. Do not respond. Do not go outside after 2200 unless following an emergency protocol. A generator failure wasn't listed as an emergency protocol. Protocol Theta for total power loss was different. It involved locking oneself in the reinforced head compartment with a hand crank radio. I reached for the noise-canceling headphones. Rule 12 was for voices calling your name, but the principle felt the same. As I lifted them, the voice on channel 3 changed. It wasn't Miller anymore. It was my father's voice, weak and raspy, the way he'd sounded in the hospital. "Son, it's so dark here. I need you to come out. I'm right outside the door." A cold fist closed around my heart. My father had died 4 months ago. The debt from his cancer treatments was the only reason I was here. The voice was perfect. A sob I didn't know I was holding choked in my throat. My hand went toward the door handle. My eyes caught on the tape. The unbroken vertical line of black. The seal. The rule. Do not open the door for any reason before 0600. I snatched my hand back as if burned. I fumbled the headphones on, jammed the play button. A hiss of white noise filled my skull, drowning out everything. I squeezed my eyes shut, but all I could see was my father's frail hand reaching for me in a sterile room. I sat there, shaking, for 20 minutes. When I finally took the headphones off, the radio was silent. Channel 3 displayed only a soft green glow. I checked the generator gauge from inside. It still read half. The auxiliary gauge, via the schematic, also read half. I didn't log the voice. Rule 7 said not to log the radar activation. This felt similar. An event designed to provoke a breach. Logging it felt like acknowledging it in a way the rules forbade. I just noted, EO27, row 237. Headphones utilized per standing order. Miller's review of the log the next morning was more thorough. He noticed the gap, the 20-minute headphone session. He looked at me sharply. "What prompted it?" "I heard something," I said, evasive. "On channel 3? I nodded. He let out a long, slow breath. "It's learning you, already. It used Miller on the first try, didn't it? Then it switched." It wasn't a question. "What did it use second?" I couldn't say it. I looked at the floor. He understood. "It'll do that. It digs. It finds a hook. Your job is to not bite. You didn't open the door. You used the headphones. That's a pass." He didn't sound congratulatory. He sounded tired. "Tonight's my last night training you. Then you're on your own for a week until the next supply plane. Pay attention." That third night, the anomalies started earlier. At 2240, The beta data tape, which I had just measured an hour before, began spooling out at an incredible rate. The machine's gentle tick-tick-tick became a frantic whir. I watched, helpless, as feet of paper piled into the collection basket. Rule 4. If it is outside this range, do not adjust the machine. Note the measurement in the log. If it is below 5 feet or above 11 feet, initiate protocol Sigma. This was clearly going to be above 11 feet. I had to wait until the measurement window closed at 2300 to be sure. At 2255, the paper stopped. The machine fell silent. I measured the warm, chaotic pile. 14 feet, 3 inches. Protocol Sigma. I disconnected the array feed. The plug was cold and came out too easily. I hauled the heavy steel cover, which felt like it weighed 100 pounds, over the control panel and spun the locking wheel. The manual said to then wait 5 minutes and check if the machine had reset. I did. At 23:05, I powered the control panel back on. The tape was motionless. The length indicator read 0. I logged the event and initiated the protocol. At 23:15, the faucet in the head began to run. I was logging the Sigma event when I heard it, the splash of water in the stainless steel basin. Not a drip, a steady, solid stream. I got up and stood in the doorway of the head. The water was crystal clear. It flowed smoothly without a hint of the salty, rusty sputter that characterized the normal supply. I watched it fill the basin and begin to overflow onto the floor. Rule 9. If the water runs clear for more than 30 seconds continuously between midnight and 0400, turn it off at the wall valve. It was only 23:15. The rule didn't apply yet, but clear water was never supposed to happen. The plumbing was bad. It was supposed to be brackish. This was wrong. I reached for the faucet handle, then stopped. The rule was time specific. It explicitly said between midnight and 0400. It was now before midnight. Did that mean it was safe? Or was it a loophole? I stood there, paralyzed by procedural doubt, as the water soaked my boots. The rational part of my brain screamed that a leak was a leak, rules or not. But the part of me that had been conditioned over the last 72 hours saw a trap. If I acted outside the rules, I was making a new pattern. I was getting noticed. I did nothing. I watched the clear water run for 2 full minutes. Then, at 23:17 exactly, it gurgled, turned brown, and resumed its normal, salty trickle. I mopped up the floor, my hands trembling. I logged nothing. The rules were silent. Miller was quiet during the handover. He read the log entry for Protocol Sigma. He saw the wet floor. He said nothing about it. Instead, he opened the binder to a new page. The paper was fresh, the handwriting recent, his own. Amendments, he said flatly. These get added after a Sigma event. Memorize them. He pushed the binder toward me. The new rules were numbered as a continuation. 15. Following a Sigma protocol, the western window blackout curtain is to be kept drawn until the next radio check with command. 16. The inventory of red flares is to be repeated every hour on the hour after a Sigma event. 17. If the clear water manifests outside the prescribed midnight to 0400 window, you are to speak the following phrase aloud in the operation shack. The reading is nominal. Do this only once. 18. The 3-knock sequence at 0100 may be preceded by a single knock at approximately 055. If this occurs, ignore the single knock completely. Do not log it. 19. Under no circumstances are you to verbally acknowledge hearing a familiar voice, even to yourself inside the shack. Internal monologue is permitted. Spoken words are not. 20. The distance for protocol row is now 40 yards, not 50. 21. If at any time you feel an overwhelming urge to look at the water, you are to immediately inventory the contents of the pantry, naming each item out loud. 22. The tape seal on the door must be inspected visually every 30 minutes. If it appears to be straining, bulging, or peeling from the center, you are to reinforce it with a second cross-shaped piece of tape. Do this without touching the original tape. I read them, a cold weight settling in my gut. The rules were getting more specific, more restrictive. The threat window was tightening. 40 yards. It's getting worse, isn't it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It's always worse after it learns something new about you, Miller said. He closed the binder. My rotation's up. The plane comes for me at 1400. You're on your own tonight. Remember the amendments. They're as important as the originals now. He packed a small bag. We didn't speak much. When the distant drone of the C-130 finally broke the afternoon silence, he just nodded at me from the tarmac before boarding. No handshake, no good luck. The plane took off, banked east, and shrank to a speck. The silence it left behind was profound. I was alone on the rock. The first solo night was a marathon of terror. I followed the original rules to the letter. I followed the new amendments with robotic precision. At 0:55, a single soft knock echoed through the shack. I ignored it. I didn't even flinch. At 0100, the familiar 3 knocks came. Then the single follow-up. I logged only the 0100 event. At 0200, during my perimeter scan, I saw it, a shape on the platform. It was near the fuel drums, just at the edge of the light. It was low to the ground, dark and wrong. It didn't look like an animal. It looked like a heap of wet rags that was somehow pulsing. And it was moving. Not toward the shack. It was moving in a perfect, slow circle around the base of the main antenna array, about 30 yards from the western edge of the platform, well within the new 40-yard row threshold. My mouth went dry. I triggered protocol row. I killed the non-essential lights, plunging most of the console into darkness. I yanked the blackout curtain across the western window, shutting out the view. I put on the headphones. In the sudden, profound silence, broken only by the hiss in my ears, I sat. I counted seconds in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. The urge to pull back the curtain, to peek, was a physical ache. I didn't. I clutched the arms of my chair until my knuckles were white. After 30 minutes, I removed the headphones. The shack was quiet. I waited another 5 minutes, then slowly, carefully, drew back the blackout curtain a ½ inch. The platform was empty. The fuel drums were just shadows. The thing was gone. I didn't log the distance. I just wrote 0200. Movement on platform near Array Alpha. Protocol row initiated. Cleared by 0235. The siege began on my 5th solo night. It started with the weather. A squall line, not uncommon out here, rolled in just after sunset. The wind picked up, howling around the corners of the shack. Rain lashed the windows. Lightning flickered in the distance, throwing the chaotic sea into brief, stroboscopic relief. I kept my eyes firmly away from those glimpses. Then, at 21:45, 15 minutes before light activation, the main power failed. The consoles died. The lights went out. The constant hum of the electronics vanished, leaving only the roar of the wind and the drumming rain. Emergency. Battery lights flickered on, casting a dim, red glow over the shack. This was it. A real emergency, not a procedural test. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fumbled for the binder. There was a section tabbed Emergency Protocols. I turned to it. The handwriting here was different, older, shakier. Emergency Protocols. Initiate upon total power loss or during sustained storm conditions with multiple rule anomalies. 1. Secure the secondary door to the head compartment. It has a manual bolt. Once secured, do not open it for any reason until full power is restored, and the time is after 0600. 2. The hand crank radio is in the head compartment. Crank for 2 minutes. Attempt contact with command on channel 9 every 15 minutes. Use only your call sign and the phrase experiencing blackout. Do not give status reports. Do not answer any queries. 3. You will hear scratching at the outer door and at the walls. This is expected. Do not investigate. The noise-canceling headphones will not be effective. Use the provided wax earplugs in head compartment med kit instead. 4. The most important rule, maintain light. The emergency lights are battery-powered. If they fail, you must use one of the 12 reed flares. Light one flare and place it in the designated floor holder in the center of the main room. A flare burns for approximately 6 minutes. You must time this exactly. You must never be in complete darkness for more than 30 seconds. If you have fewer than 6 flares remaining, you must ration them to last until 0600. 5. If you see a face at any window, do not look away. Maintain eye contact until it moves away of its own accord. Do not blink for longer than 1 second. This was a new level of nightmare. I acted. I grabbed the battery-powered lantern from its bracket and moved to the head. I shut the flimsy inner door through the heavy manual bolt. The small space felt like a tomb. I found the hand crank radio and the tin of wax earplugs. I cranked the radio for 2 agonizing minutes, my arm burning, then switched to channel 9. Kappa 7, experiencing blackout. Static. Kappa 7, experiencing blackout. No reply. It was just me and the storm. I returned to the main shack, earplugs squeezed tightly into my ears. The world became muted. The howling wind was a dull roar. The rain was a patter. And then I heard the other sound, the scratching. It was a dry, insistent scrape, like claws on metal. It started at the western wall, the one facing the open ocean. Then it moved. I could hear it traverse the corner, scraping along the southern wall, past the sealed door, then along the eastern wall. It was making a circuit, a slow, deliberate circle around the entire shack, just outside. I looked at the blackout curtain over the western window. Rule 5 of the emergency protocols echoed in my head. If you see a face, I had no intention of looking. I focused on the light. The red emergency lights were holding. I checked my watch, 22:20. I had 7 hours and 40 minutes until dawn. For the next 2 hours, I performed a grim ballet. Every 15 minutes, I retreated to the bolted head, cranked the radio, sent my futile message. Every time, static. Between attempts, I monitored the battery lights. At 23:45, the first one began to dim. I had to act before it failed. I opened the flare compartment, 12 flares. I removed one. It was heavy, cold metal. I read the instructions, my eyes skipping over the benign warnings about holding away from body. At 23:50, as the first light guttered and died, plunging a quarter of the room into shadow, I struck the flare. A blinding, actinic red light erupted with a fierce pop hiss. The light was brutal, chemical. and threw frantic, dancing shadows everywhere. It smelled of sulfur and burning metal. I placed it in the floor holder, a welded steel cup in the center of the room. The scratching outside stopped. For 6 minutes, the flare burned. I timed it on my watch. At 5 minutes and 50 seconds, I had the second flare ready. As the first sputtered into a dull, blackened stick, I lit the second. The light was continuous. The scratching did not resume. The storm raged. The scratching returned after the third flare, but now it was accompanied by a new sound. A low, wet thudding against the door, like a heavy fish being slapped against the metal. I didn't investigate. I cranked the radio. I changed flares. I counted the minutes. At 0200, during my fourth flare, I saw it. I had been staring at the floor, avoiding the windows, but a peripheral movement caught my eye. The blackout curtain over the western window was not fully drawn at the bottom, a gap of about an inch. And in that gap, framed by the raging storm outside, was an eye. It was large. It was a deep, murky green, like ocean water over a trench. It had no white, no discernible pupil. It was just a solid, intelligent orb pressed against the glass, staring directly at me. Emergency protocol rule 5 flashed in my mind. Do not look away. I was trapped. I lifted my gaze and met the eye. The world shrank to that circle of wet glass and the unblinking eye behind it. It held no emotion I could name, no malice, no curiosity. It was a presence, a pressure. My own eyes burned. I dared not blink. The flare hissed beside me, casting the red light that made the green of the eye look black. Seconds stretched into eternities. My breath fogged in the cold air of the shack. A tear, born of strain and terror, traced a hot path down my cheek. I didn't wipe it. Then slowly, with a slight sideways slide, the eye moved out of the gap and was gone. I gasped, blinking rapidly, my vision swimming with after images. I checked my watch. The contact had lasted 1 minute and 17 seconds. I felt drained, hollowed out. I lit the next flare on schedule. The rest of the night was a blur of exhausting ritual. Flare, crank, static, scratch, thud. I went through 8 flares at 0500 with 1 hour to go. I had 4 flares left. Enough light. The storm began to abate. The wind dropped to a moan. The scratching became intermittent, then ceased. At 0545, in the ghastly red light of the 9th flare, I did not turn off the exterior lights. They were already dead. I simply waited. At 0600 exactly, as the first gray hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, the main generator coughed, sputtered, and roared back to life. Lights flickered on, consoles beeped, and whirred back to life. The normal world reasserted itself with a deafening suddenness. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the spent, blackened rods of my flares. The tape on the door was intact. The blackout curtain was drawn. The door to the head was still bolted. I moved like an automaton. I unbolted the head. I powered down the hand crank radio. I removed the wax plugs from my aching ears. I disposed of the flare debris in the designated metal bin. Then I went to the door. My hand shook as I reached for the tape. I peeled it off in one smooth pull. I unlocked the door and opened it. The morning air was clean, washed by the storm. The platform was littered with seaweed and splashes of deep sea foam that gleamed with a faint, oily iridescence. There were no footprints, no marks. But near the western edge, about 10 yards from the drop, the concrete was stained a dark, damp color in a perfect circle about 6 feet in diameter. It looked like something heavy and wet had rested there for a long time. I didn't investigate. I went back inside and logged everything. The power failure, the storm, the enactment of emergency protocols, the eye. I was exhaustive. The log was my testimony. The following days were a tense return to baseline. The stain on the platform remained for 48 hours, then faded to a faint gray shadow, as if bleached by the sun. I followed the rules with a newfound grim reverence. The knocks came. The beta tape measured with intolerance. The voice on Channel 3 tried twice more, once as Miller asking about the stain, once as my father crying. I used the headphones. I did not speak. I spent my daylight hours when I should have been sleeping, reading the old logs in the binder. They went back years. The handwriting changed every few months. New occupants. The entries grew more sparse, more procedural. Over time, the early logs from a decade ago had more descriptive notes. Unusual bioluminescence spotted due west. Pattern suggestive of communication. Or hydrophone picked up. Structured clicking at Oro 400. Matched no known cetacean profile. Then 5 years ago, the logs changed. The entries became list of rule following. The first iteration of the standing orders appeared in a tight, precise script signed Reyes. Her final entry, after a 6-month rotation, read, "It understands schedules now. It is learning to keep time. Do not give it anything new to measure." Miller's logs were after hers. His notes were all business. Until his last few weeks, when he'd added the amendments I now followed. His final entry, the day I arrived, simply said, "Relief incoming. Fatigue is a vector. Stay sharp." On my 8th solo night, the supply plane came early, buzzing the platform at 2100, just as I was preparing for the shift. It circled once, a dark shape against the twilight, and landed. It wasn't the usual C-130. It was a smaller, twin-prop cargo plane. A man jumped out, bundled in a jacket, and hauled a pallet of crates onto the tarmac. He saw me in the shack doorway and gave a curt wave. I didn't wave back. Rules were for night, but caution was eternal. After he took off, I hauled the crates inside. Food, water, batteries, and a box of spare parts, and a letter addressed to me on company letterhead. Personnel update. Your relief, Technician Davis, will arrive on schedule in 7 days. Complete orientation per manual. A review of your logs indicates satisfactory compliance. Hazard bonus authorized for storm event survival. Continue standard protocols. Satisfactory compliance. It was the only praise I would ever get, and it felt like a verdict. The next night, at 22:15, the radio check with command was different. The usual female voice recited the codes. I read back the confirmation. There was a pause. Then a male voice came on, older, with a gravelly tone. "Kappa 7, this is dispatch. Authenticate Bravo Charlie 7. I fumbled for the code sheet. Bravo Charlie 7 was yesterday's authentication code. Today's was Bravo Charlie 8. A mistake? A test? My mind raced. Rule 3. Communications only on Channel 6. It didn't specify what to do if command used wrong codes. But the implication was clear. Procedure was sacred. Using yesterday's code was a break in pattern. I keyed the mic. "Dispatch, Kappa 7. Please repeat authentication." A longer pause, static. Then the female voice returned, crisp and clear. "Kappa 7, authenticate Bravo Charlie 8. I authenticated. The check ended. My hands were slick with sweat. I logged it precisely. 22:15, radio check. Initial auth code incorrect. Bravo Charlie 7. Corrected after query. Logged. It was a small thing, a slip. But in the sterile world of the rules, it was a seismic event. Command, my lifeline, had made an error. Or something had mimicked command well, but not perfectly. The seed of doubt, once planted, put down deep roots. The following night, the anomaly was visual. During my midnight perimeter scan, I saw a figure. It was standing beside the fuel drums, utterly still, facing the shack. It wore the familiar, faded blue coveralls, Miller's coveralls. But the posture was wrong. Miller had a permanent stoop, a sailor's slouch. This figure stood ramrod straight, arms at its sides. The face was in shadow, cast by the floodlight behind it. My breath froze. It was within 40 yards. Protocol Row was triggered. I killed the lights, drew the curtain, put on the headphones. I sat in the dark, my mind racing. Miller was gone. His coveralls should be in his locker or on a plane to Hawaii. Not on a figure on the platform. After 30 minutes, I looked. The platform was empty. At dawn, I did something I had never done. I broke a daytime rule. I went to Miller's old locker. It was unlocked. Inside, neatly folded on the bare metal shelf, were his faded blue coveralls. They were dry. They smelled of detergent and mildew, not the sea. I closed the locker. I did not log the event. Some things were beyond the log. They were in the territory of the unspoken, the unknowable. The thing was not just testing the rules anymore. It was wearing them. Davis arrived on a bright, cloudless afternoon. He was younger than me, maybe 25, with a quick smile that didn't reach his eyes. He had a nervous energy, constantly touching his wedding ring. "Big sky out here," he said, staring at the horizon. "Makes you feel small." I gave him the tour. The generator, the bunk room, the head. He asked practical questions about the equipment. He seemed competent. At sunset, I sat him down with the binder. "Read them out loud," I said, echoing Miller. He did. His voice was clear, confident. When he finished, he tapped the page. "So, all this, it's just to keep us from going stir-crazy. Psychological ops stuff." "It's to keep you alive," I said, my tone flat. "The rules are the job. You break them, you die. Or worse." He smirked, just a little. "Worse than dying on this rock." I didn't answer. I just looked at him until the smirk faded. "Your first shift is with me. Watch and learn. Do exactly as I do." The training shifts passed. Davis was a quick study, but he had a skeptic's edge. He followed procedures, but I could see the question in his eyes every time he placed the tape on the door, every time he ignored the knocks. He thought it was a game, an elaborate hazing ritual. He'd confided his wife was pregnant, that they needed the money for a house. He had a hook, just like I did, just like Miller did. The thing would find it. On his final training night, we had a clear water event. Right at midnight, the faucet in the head began to run clear. Davis, to his credit, moved to turn it off at the wall valve exactly at 30 seconds, as per Rule 9. I stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Wait," I whispered. "The rule says 30 seconds, he whispered back, confused. No, just wait." We watched the clear water flow for 45 seconds, a full minute. It was mesmerizing, wrong. At 75 seconds, it gurgled and turned brown. Davis looked at me, his face pale. "Why did we wait? The rule?" "The rule is a threshold," I said. "Sometimes it's important to see how far past the threshold the anomaly will go. It tells you what it wants." What did it want? It wanted us to break the rule, to act prematurely, or it wanted to show us it could control the water for longer than the rule accounts for. Both are data. I sounded like Miller. I hated it. My final night on Kappa 7 was unnervingly calm. The rules held. The knocks came and went. The beta tape measured 8 feet 1 inch. At 05:45, as I turned off the floodlights, Davis stood beside me, looking out at the dark. "It's just water and wind," he said, almost to himself. "It's never just anything," I replied. I handed him the binder at 0600 after breaking the tape. "The log is your testimony," I said. "It's the only thing that matters." He took it, that faint, skeptical smile back on his lips. "Don't worry, I've got it." The plane ride back to Honolulu was a decompression sickness of the soul. The world seemed too loud, too bright, too full of unpredictable patterns. In the debrief office, a different man with the same tired eyes handed me my bank draft. It was more money than I'd ever held. It felt meaningless. I went home to Portland, to Lena, to a life that no longer fit. Home was a museum of a person I used to be. Lena's joy at my return curdled into concern within days. I taped the balcony door. I inventoried the pantry at 3 a.m. I woke her once, screaming about a face at the window that was just the reflection of a street lamp on wet glass. The phone call at 1:17 a.m. was the breaking point. The landline, that relic. 15 rings, then silence. A single ring at 1:20. I spent the night on the kitchen floor, naming cans. Lena found me. The fear in her eyes was for me, but it felt like a reflection of the fear I had for the thing in the dark. I was bringing the pattern home. I saw a therapist once. The window in her office was a glaring vulnerability. I counted leaves. I never went back. Lena moved out a month later. The silence she left behind was different from the oceanic silence. It was a hollow, human silence, full of ghosts of conversations we should have had. I paid off my father's debt with a few clicks of a mouse. The astronomical number in my account shrank, and a weight I'd carried for years lifted. And yet, I felt heavier. The money was blood money, paid for by my sanity, by my relationship, by Davis, out there on the rock, now standing in the place I had stood. The emails from Davis started a week after Lena left. First one. "The knocks came in 4s last night, not 3. The tape on the door bulged. I did the cross tape like the amendment said. It stopped. What does 4 knocks mean?" I didn't answer. Rule of survival. Don't get involved. Second one, 2 days later. "The beta array reads 0. Has for 3 days. Command says it's a fault. It's not a fault. The paper is dry. It's like the machine is holding its breath. I can hear something on the roof. A scraping, like dragging. Miller never mentioned the roof." I stared at the screen. He was in the thick of it. It was adapting to him, finding new edges to press against. 4 knocks. A roof. It was expanding its repertoire. I knew I should not reply, but I saw his pregnant wife in my mind, a photo he'd shown me on his phone, a hook. I broke my own rule. I wrote back, "Do not deviate. If the knocks are in 4s, ignore all knocks. Do not log them. The roof noise is a stress test. Beta at 0, and treat as sub 5 reading. Initiate Sigma. Then follow post-Sigma amendments. Inventory flares every 30 minutes. Draw the blackout curtain and do not open it until dawn. Do not answer this email." I hit send, a breach, an acknowledgement. The consequences manifested not on the rock, but in my new, chosen sanctuary. I had taken a night security job at a data storage bunker on the edge of the city, Bunker C. It was a fortress, concrete, steel, humming servers. It had rules of its own, simple ones, patrol routes, key swipes. I followed them with Kappa 7 fervor. The night after I emailed Davis, my step count was wrong. The midnight patrol of the main aisle was 247 steps. I had walked it a dozen times. That night, I counted 243. The aisle was shorter. I stopped, closed my eyes, counted backward from 100. When I opened them, I was 3 feet from the entrance to aisle 7, the one with the perpetually flickering camera. I had not walked there. On the monitor, aisle 7's feed showed a dark, damp patch on the gray epoxy floor, seeping from under a server rack. It hadn't been there before. I tapped the console twice, acknowledging the flicker. I did not investigate. The next email from Davis was worse. It used my wife's voice. It knew about the sonogram, the due date. It said she was here in the storm. I almost opened the door. The flare inventory is off. I have 11. I started with 12. I never used one. What takes a flare? My blood went cold. It was inside the rules now. Manipulating the inventory. The flare count was a bedrock metric. If it could change that, it could change anything. It was demonstrating its ability to alter perceived reality within the rule set. I wrote back a cold procedural response. Discrepancy is a test. Log the count as 11. Proceed as if you have 11. Do not search for the missing flare. It wants you to look. I was coaching him through a haunting. I was part of the pattern. At the bunker, the water cooler bubbled 3 times at 1:17 a.m. The step count continued to fluctuate. The stain in aisle 7 grew. A faint, briny smell, utterly alien to the sterile environment, began to permeate the air near my console. I received a voicemail on the bunker's security line. It was Davis's voice, but distorted, slowed, as if played back underwater. The water is so clear here. You can see all the way down. The patterns are beautiful. Then a wet, choking sound and 3 distinct knocks. I erased it. I did not log it. My final email to Davis was an act of surgical cruelty. This is my final communication. You are on your own. The rules are complete in the binder. Your survival depends on your compliance, not my advice. Do not contact me again. I will not respond. I blocked him. I quit the bunker job the next day. The pattern was following me, using the connections I made, the rules I upheld elsewhere. I needed to disappear. I drove into the high desert of Oregon to a trailer on a barren plot near a town called Brothers. No water for miles, just dust and wind and silence. I taped the windows. I made simple rules based on the sun. For a time, the null silence worked. Then the parcels arrived. The first, a spent red flare in a box, smelling of the sea. I buried it. The second, a 14-foot strip of beta array tape, the lines forming a perfect, repeating sine wave. I burned it. The third, the binder, Davis's binder, warped, damp-smelling, but dry. His frantic notes in the margins. His final entry. It doesn't want me to leave. The plane came. The sky got dark like a lid. I am alone. It's in the shack with me. It's learning from the binder. I'm leaving this for you. You understand. You have to finish the log. He was gone, and he had passed the core rulebook to me. The testimony was now my burden. That night, the desert wind shaped itself into 3 knocks, circling the trailer. The pattern had found its new locus. The binder was with me. I knew then that running was useless. The rules were a language, and I was fluent. The thing spoke that language. It would converse with me, one way or another. I had to end the conversation. I did not burn the binder. That would be an act of passion, a break in procedure. Instead, I began the most important log entry of my life. I added my final amendments, the meta rules born of everything I had learned. Final amendments and consolidations, for the record. A. The phenomenon is not location locked. It is attracted to and propagated through strict procedural adherence, coupled with emotional vulnerability. The rules are both shield and signal. B, it learns through observation of rule breaking, but more effectively through observation of rule making. Each new amendment, each personal ritual provides a new pattern for it to replicate and distort. C, its primary objective seems to be the erosion of the boundary between sanctioned procedure and the entity's own nature. It seeks to become the rule. D, the only definitive endpoint is the cessation of all pattern making by the subject. Inability to comply is not a breach. Apathy is a defense. Silence, not of rule, but of self, may be the only exit. E, this binder is now a vector. Reading these words with comprehension initiates low-grade resonance. You are now aware. The procedures begin. I closed the binder. I had named the unnameable. I had defined the game. Now I had to end it. My plan was not escape. It was quarantine. I needed to bury the binder, the physical locus of the pattern, in a place where no rules would ever be made around it. A place of absolute nullity. I studied maps. I settled on the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah. Vast, white, dead. A place where the horizon was a razor line and silence was absolute. I drove for 2 days, the binder sealed in a waterproof metal case on the passenger seat. I arrived at night. The flats were a moonlit ghostland. I drove until my GPS failed, until I was in the center of nothing. I stopped. I got out. The silence was immense, pressing. No wind, no life, just the crunch of salt under my boots. I had brought a shovel. I dug. The salt crust was hard, then gave way to damp clay beneath. I dug a hole 3 feet wide, 6 feet deep. I placed the metal case at the bottom. Before I filled it in, I performed one last, perfect rule loop. A ritual of termination. I walked a measured circle around the hole, exactly 20 paces in radius. With each step, I spoke a phrase from the rules, but in reverse order. 14. The log is testimony. 13. Do not open the door. 12. Do not acknowledge. Back through the numbers, my voice the only sound in the universe. At the end, standing over the hole, I said, Rule 1. Do not look at the water in the dark. Then I added my own coda, the only original words I would allow myself. This pattern is complete. This log is closed. No successor, no testimony. Be silent. I filled the hole. I tamped the salt flat smooth. I left no marker. I drove away as the sun rose, turning the salt flats into a blinding white hellscape. In the rearview mirror, the burial site vanished into the uniformity. It was done. I did not go back to the desert trailer. I went to a mid-sized city in the Midwest, a place chosen at random from a map, Lincoln, Nebraska. I rented a room in a boarding house under a cash-paid alias. I got a job as a dishwasher in a loud, chaotic restaurant. The work was menial, repetitive, but without consequence. No inventory, no patrols, no log. My therapy was chaos. I forced myself to break every compulsive pattern. I left windows uncovered. I ignored odd numbers. When I heard a fragment of a familiar voice in the kitchen din, I did not flinch. I let the noise wash over me. I made mistakes. I was a bad employee. I was forgetful. I was apathetic. I was trying to become uninteresting to a thing that fed on attention. It is a daily war. The itch to count the plates, to establish an order for the silverware, is a physical craving. I resist. Some nights, I still wake at 2:14, heart pounding, sure I have forgotten to check a gauge that doesn't exist. I lie still. I do not get up. I stare at the water stain on the ceiling and think of nothing. I do not know if the salt flats held the pattern. I do not know if Davis is truly gone, or if he became something else out there on the rock. I do not know what the thing in the dark ultimately is. I only know the rules it follows. Sometimes I see signs. A puddle after rain that is too still, too perfectly circular. A customer who knocks 4 times on the restroom door. The radio in the kitchen playing static that resolves for just a second into the sound of waves. I do not react. I do not amend. I let the pattern pass without a witness. This is my life now. A deliberate, painful unraveling. The Pacific is 2,000 miles away, but what it taught me is carried in the very structure of my thoughts. I am a former priest of a terrible religion, trying to forget the liturgy. The pay from Kappa 7 still sits in my account. I rarely touch it. It feels like a poison pill. I live on my dishwasher wages. I own nothing. I am attached to no one. I am a blank page. This is not a victory. It is a stalemate, a quiet, desperate holding action fought in the trenches of my own mind. I survive by being boring, by being broken, by being a rule that writes itself out of existence. The last flare has burned out. The tape has lost its stick. The channel is static. I am counting down from 100, and when I reach 0, I will be gone. But for now, I am here. I am washing this plate, then the next one. I am not counting them. The water is hot, and it is only water. The window is black with night, and I do not look at it. I just wash the next plate, and the next.